Okay, comrades, I'd like to welcome everybody to this week's meeting of the Workers' International Network. Uh, there are so many explosions and so many uh, struggles all bursting out all over the world at the moment. And it's almost hard for us, even on a weekly meeting, to catch up or to keep up with them all. We've had discussions recently on the Iranian uprising, on on the uh, struggles in. I don't really need to think. Obviously, what we've been talking about now, the uprising, the mobilizations in Minneapolis and in other places, what we've just been talking about in the USA and so on. Now, Venezuela, I think, I'm not going to. I'm not going to say anything about it now. Maybe I can, participate in the discussion later. But I mean, I think we have to see Venezuela in that global context. It's not simply a local crisis. It's one side of the violent changes that are taking place and shaking the world today. And it's not just a local trouble spot, as I say. It's a step towards the recapture of the entire subcontinent by US imperialism. And there's a whole background to that, there's been kind of well over a century when, since the USA claimed domination of the entire South American subcontinent. And there's been in that time continual struggles, one way or the other, of the masses to try to assert their independence and their control, and brutal clampdowns by imperialism or by their local counterparts, their local agents, in order to crush them. But one of the most important struggles, among many that shook the whole region, was, of course, the Chavez uh, phenomenon that started at the turn of this century. And we've seen since then. I won't say any more. I'll leave it to Comrade Federico to take it from there. Federico is, of course, a comrade we've seen before, comrade from Argentina, and he has obviously a very close and intimate knowledge of Venezuela and of the whole subcontinent. So I'll hand over to Federico now. If you speak for like 20, 25 minutes. We've also got Comrade Norma here, who's also Argentinian, who may also, I'm sure she'll also have a contribution to make. And of course, it's open to everybody to join the discussion. Yeah, over to you, Comrade.
It, I hope everyone's okay. There's so much going on with Venezuela, and it's impossible not to talk a little bit about the U.S. as well. That I'm going to try to stick to facts and then two or three points that could be important discussion points or discussions going on. Concretely, on January 3rd, after a few months of escalation in the Caribbean, which started in August, the U.S. launched a limited bombing attack on Venezuela and kidnapped the president and his Maduro and his wife Celia Flores, and imprisoned them in the United States awaiting trial. Um, there's a lot of doubts still about how that happened, which we can, for example, why the anti-air defenses that Venezuela supposedly has, that China installed, completely failed, why the military did not react in any time, why Maduro seems to have been taken by surprise as well, despite having been in negotiations with the Trump administration until just days before. And the new government has not given clear responses to these things is. So one of the debates that is going on in Venezuela now on a massive level is, how did this happen? Was there was there some arrangement or treason from within? What kind? Who? How was it? They don't buy the kind of, few people buy they were able to just technologically annul all the defenses and pluck Maduro out. But the fact is that there isn't a clear response from the government. The other fact is, once Maduro was gone, the vice president, Delcy Rodriguez, took office, and after rhetorically denouncing the attack and demanding the release of Maduro and his wife, immediately and openly caved in, either under pressure or as part of an agreement, but openly reached an agreement with the Trump administration that led to receiving publicly and with honors the CIA director on Venezuelan soil, announcing the reopening of relations and work towards reopening the embassy, and more recently announcing a new bill to reform the hydrocarbons law, which is what is left of the Bolivarian revolution. It is the law for which was the main reason behind the 2000 coup attempt against Chavez. All while Trump openly also talks about governing Venezuela directly and taking their oil. That's I think facts until now, facts and doubts. I think there's two things to look at. One has to do with the U.S. and the other about Venezuela. My idea is to be brief about the U.S., but I think it's important because it's the context Roger was referring to. This, together with a few days later, the assassination of Rene Good in Minneapolis, just a few blocks from where George Floyd was assassinated in 2020, signify a change in the situation, in our opinion. In Trump's offensive, we've been analyzing that Trump basically represents a sector of the imperialist bourgeoisie that has reached the conclusion that the entire world imperialist infrastructure that was built after World War II is no longer useful for them. U.S. imperialism has been in decline, and it's a sector that's reached the conclusion that that entire setup is no good for reversing the decline of U.S. imperialism. So there's this attempt by Trump of kind of throwing that all out the window, imposing a much more direct imperialist submission of everyone, friends and foes alike, and trying to reach a position from which to negotiate directly with the big competing powers like China or Russia at another level, etc. Is at least what we think Trump represents. And this is a huge step in asserting that kind of imperialist domination. It is the return to the Monroe doctrine. It is returning to a kind of imperialist intervention we haven't seen since the 50s, in directly stepping into a country, kidnapping its president, and openly saying they've thrown out the window all pretense of intervening in the name of democracy and sending democracy around the world and spreading democracy, of humanitarian intervention, they even threw out immediately after imprisoning Maduro the accusations of narco traffic. It is a return to this is us because we have the power to do so and we need it, and we're going to take everything we need to guarantee our power. That's why the threats with Greenland, with everything else we're saying that I'm sure you've been following. I'm not going to get into. But that has provoked a reaction in the United States, because the flip side of the attack on Venezuela and the offensive in asserting imperialist power abroad is a war at home against any kind of resistance, because the anti-ICE movement is the one thing that has made Trump stop a couple of times already. In Los Angeles, he had to step away. In Chicago, he had to step away. And so he has stepped up with 7 votes from the Democrats. He got $3 billion more approved by Congress for ICE. There's military experts that describe their tactics as being exactly the same anti-insurgency tactics and like shock and awe and surge strategies that they used in Afghanistan and Iraq in these cities against the population. And the reaction has been, there is a reaction. I think that's what, and we're trying to be careful about analyzing this without going too much in one direction or the other, but there is a reaction in 3 cities now: Los Angeles, Chicago, and now Minneapolis at a much higher level. There's been a mass rebellion against ICE. There's been, now with the general strike in Minneapolis, confronting radicalized. That's huge. It would be very different if that was not happening. But that has not generalized at a national level. That's the state of the reaction, the resistance, if you will. There is a huge majority that oppose Trump, expressed in the No Kings marches. There is a huge radicalized vanguard of thousands of activists that are getting organized in every city and all across the country. But the kind of mass rebellion that can have an effect in actually stopping Trump and making him step back, for now, has been localized to the specific hotspots where ICE has attacked in this way. These 2 things are going to come together. I mean, what can stop Trump's attack on Latin America, on the rest of the world? It is the resistance we can put up wherever he attacks, but it's also the resistance that the American working class can put up. Without some level of both those things, there's no way to defeat Trump, and that's the main task we should all have as revolutionaries today. Venezuela, and I'll start with this. Another one of the debates is why wasn't there any kind of popular resistance to this attack? Why weren't there mobilizations? Why wasn't there? And that has to do with an analysis of how we got here and what the Maduro regime had turned into. Because in our organization in Venezuela, I'm in the MST in Argentina, just part of the Left Front, and we have the International Socialist League, and our party in Venezuela is Marea Socialista. It's an organization that played a huge role in the beginning of the Bolivarian Revolution. Marea is a founding member organization of the PSUV when it was founded. Some of its leaders were national leaders of the party, though we never entered the government. And some of our members were like Stalin Perez Borges, the main leaders of the trade union federation that came out of the 2002 revolution against the coup attempt, the UNT. Maria was able to establish itself as part of the movement with independence, with its newspaper, with being a part of the movement, and the PSUV being critical of what it had to be, having its public opinion, etc. That we were able to do that. But there was a huge change which began before Maduro, before Chavez died, but really consolidated and deepened with Maduro in power, which over time and culminating around 2018, 2019, 2020, we have to define as a complete counter-revolution. I mean, he undid just about every gain that the Bolivarian Revolution had made, starting with the most significant ones, which were the ones felt by the huge majority of the population, who, with Chavez, saw a doctor for the first time in their life, for many millions, who had a huge rise in their level of wages and life. In general, all of that has been destroyed to a level of what comrades call salary zero in Venezuela, for example, where the minimum wage, which is supposed to be $1,000, is essentially $0 because the most of the wages are paid in government handouts, food stamps, and all kinds of other clientele. In the same process, millions of Venezuelans left the country, mainly for these economic reasons, of it being unlivable. This destroyed the social base of the regime, which also became incredibly authoritarian and repressive. Maria Socialista was kicked out of the PSUV in 2014, if I'm remembering correctly. It was then not allowed to get to legalize. It was banned. It was prescribed. The Aporrea website was censored repeatedly. Most of the political prisoners in prisons now are union activists, left-wing opposition activists. This is what the Maduro regime had turned into. The social base it retained was, we believe, almost entirely based on clientelism and not on any ideological thing that is left from the Bolivarian Revolution. This is what we think explains the lack of any kind of reaction and defense of what happened. The level of rejection of the regime is absolutely massive. The recession in consciousness is massive because there's an identification with the left, with socialism and this regime. And so there is even sectors that were happy to have the United States come in and get rid of Maduro with the thought of, we'll see what we do next. It's a bad situation, but we have to recognize it. What happened here? Oh, sorry. I thought my computer had frozen. This is also what we think explains what's happening now, because there can be speculations of was there treason? Why is the vice president of Maduro now basically implementing the central aspects of the program of every bourgeois right-wing opposition the Venezuelan government has had over the last few decades? And one part is Trump himself. Why he needs to control the country without invading it. And if there is a bureaucracy in place that is either willing to cooperate or that he can threaten into, because it is also true that he maintains the military presence and is open about having said, you do everything I say, or we'll just, pluck you out like we did Maduro and try with the next one. So to what degree there is an imposition or an agreement with the regime. What is a fact is that this is the policies that they are implementing, and we think Trump has an interest in a transition that can be done by people that actually control the bureaucracy of a state, of the military, of everything else, which he would not have if he just plucked in Machado or anyone else who does not have a social base of their own. As for the Venezuelan side, beyond speculations, of if there was an agreement of treacherous treason agreement before or after. The discussion is if it happened before or after the strike. What is a fact is that today the government that is in place has accepted to be a tutelage, essentially a puppet government run by the United States, a almost colonial government. They have accepted this, and they have maintained everything that the regime was in essence. The few political prisoners that have been released these days are almost all of them right wingers. They continued even in the months leading up to the strike, when there was the buildup in the Caribbean, and many on the left were petitioning to open things up, to organize a resistance with all anti-imperialist forces. The regime continued imprisoning left oppositionists and union leaders, including comrades of ours like Jean Mendoza. And now it's maintaining that structure of a repressive regime, authoritarian regime, but now politically and aligned with the United States of the Trump administration. That's why, and I'll finish with this, Marea Socialista, for 2 or 3 years ago, the remaining left forces that were a part of the regime were pushed out, like the Communist Party of Venezuela. And for the last 2 or 3 years, we have been building a kind of united front coalition with a number of small Trotskyist organizations, other revolutionary organizations that are not Trotskyist, a social democratic one, and the Communist Party of Venezuela, to act as a united front, building some opposition to what Maduro was in the last few years, and more so now with this government from the left. And now there's going to be a petition, declaration that will come out in the next couple of days by this united front, rejecting in the first place the imperialist intervention, rejecting this puppet government that is implementing the measures that the U.S. is demanding, rejecting the change of the hydrocarbons law and defending the state ownership of most of the oil, and implementing the necessary social rights that are missing, democratic rights that are missing, the wages that are necessary, using the oil revenues for the necessities of the Venezuelan people. This is the bright side is there is this united front that exists, there is something on the left that will be acting in the Venezuelan reality, and that we are building an international campaign around to oppose this situation and this new colonial regime that is being imposed in Venezuela.
Right, thank you, comrades. Right, it's open for discussion. Who wants to be first? Ian.
Hi, comrades. Yeah, I've got a slightly different perspective on some things around Maduro, especially. I think first thing I'd like to say how magnificently he seems to have behaved under fire as a prisoner of the United States when he was first appeared in New York with all these agents. They had to have their faces all blanked out. He had his both thumbs up, big smile on his face to really keep the spirits up and show some resistance. That I think there is going to have to be, and I think there is going to be a big defense campaign around him. This illegitimate kidnapping of any foreign head of state. And whatever we think of Maduro as a socialist, most heads of state are not socialist, and none should be arrested in this way by the imperial power as an act of naked aggression. Including some of the charge sheet against Maduro from Pam Bondi, the pretty absurd US Justice Secretary, includes possession of firearms. Now, I know that the Second Amendment in the United States doesn't apply to foreign nationals, but for a foreign president in his own country to have a security detail, like presumably most presidents do, shouldn't lead to his extraterritorial extradition to the United States to stand trial for charges of doing something that absolutely every American, even if they want to be a school shooter, is supposedly allowed to do, especially by Trump's wing of United States public opinion. So it's nakedly farcical, this abduction of Maduro, and I think it is this, obviously, that he fell to, in as much as he's fallen at all as president, not for any real or imagined failings of socialism, whether that's people on the right saying that it's a failing of socialism itself, or people on the left saying that he failed socialism. But there can be situations, even very close in Latin America, where it was the internal contradictions that brought the left-wing government down. I'm certainly not wanting to deny that in a kind of boneheaded or blindly supportivist way. Obviously, in Bolivia, there was a split between the two leading personalities in the left government there that would make Jeremy Corbyn and Zara Sultana look like the best of friends marching in lockstep in this country on the left, and brought the right back to power in a totally unnecessary way after overturning a coup just 5 years previously. But this wasn't that. It was snatched out on a helicopter. I think also Trump is a liar and a fantasist. And applying Occam's razor to that, it's more likely that he's being a liar and a fantasist and saying, oh, yes, Delcy Rodriguez is my puppet, who's agreed to do everything I want, and isn't she a wonderful Trumpite now? When she's saying, I recognize Nicolas Maduro as the sole legal president of Venezuela, he's currently abroad, I'm his deputy filling in until we get him back, which you'd think if she was a Trumpite puppet or someone in the parlance that's doing the rounds in my country, in the UK right now, if she was a traitor rather than a faithful, that she wouldn't be doing that. And if it was some kind of a dance, that she's doing that, but dealing with him as a conscious instrument as opposed to having had a gun put to her country's head and not being able to fully resist as much as you'd like, given the military situation. She also, I think when she was still vice president, was personally involved in, and Maduro was still there, I mean, because she's still just vice president, you know what I mean? She was personally involved, I believe, in inviting not just my party comrade, but my branch comrade, Craig Murray of Edinburgh, your party, over to Venezuela, where he's just landed to show solidarity with it and report from there from a different perspective from what you're getting in the Western mainstream press. And it'll be very interesting what he says, because he's got an inbuilt BS detector. I think if she was a traitor, she wouldn't have gone for him. So I think there's obviously ways that the revolution went off track. The price of oil collapsing, the sanctions, the fact that they never transitioned away from oil to a sufficient extent to deal with the sanctions and the price collapse. Also having this opposition that are basically fascistic, making the Trumpian claim that we won every time that they lose, but also unleashing deadly violence, has put the government in a genuinely very difficult position. I think there has seemed to be repression against the left in recent years. They're dealing with things bureaucratically rather than politically, to use the old adage. But that said, the Communist Party of Venezuela position, um, which seems to be like the Communist Party of Greece, a strange mixture of views, including third period Stalinism, that the Bolivarian government is now neoliberal. I think that's
Ian,
wrong and shouldn't have been dealt
you
with
to wind
in the
up,
way it
please?
was. But yeah, I think it seems in some ways more like Cuba coming out of the special period, but instead of coming out of it and there's the pink tide in Latin America, they've come out of it and America's come in and effectively invaded. So yeah, just a few differences of opinion to discuss there. Hope I've done all right on that.
Okay, thanks, Ian. I'm sure that will stimulate some discussion. Can comrades hear me okay? Because I'm told
Yes.
there's a problem with my microphone. No?
I
Okay.
I
Okay,
have.
thanks. Norma and then Finn.
Yes, thank you. Thank you very much. I I would like to summarize for myself at least with 4 points. And I think that we to do not be lost in names or in oppositions. So the first, I mean, we are analyzing today Venezuela, but we need to keep in mind the world situation as a whole. I mean, the geopolitical world situation, economic will come, and the imperialism, and particularly within that, the imperialism and the Trump today. And then also the other parts of this geopolitics, which were incident or are incident in this context of Venezuela. I mean, China, Iran, Russia more far said, but even that, and the weak also situation of Europe as a political said region. In that context, the fact in the political in the Trump politics plans today, it appears this fact of kidnapping a political chief president in Venezuela, etc., etc. Now, why this happened? I mean, and without any reaction from inside in Venezuela, at least, said it was supposed to be or it's supposed to be a socialist country, and no reaction, no political reaction, no very weak reaction, said even supported from inside in the country. So I think that we need to, and with that, why all the right wing, said in Latin America, but also in other regions, simultaneously is happening. So Venezuela, besides if Maduro or before, but at the present, it was a dictatorship. And this was not sufficiently enough worked out by left, by also many left political in jail prisoners today in Venezuela. There are opposite from left, and this was completely, even today, not work it out from left, from different part of left. Human rights were denunciating, and I mean, not from right, from the extreme right. I mean, there is a Michelle Bachelet report. I mean, you can take it taken from other human rights organizations in Venezuela. So there was there is and there was a problem, and that was not analyzed. So the problem, I finish with that. I mean, even supporting even supporting the Iran regime and not supporting the sublevation set of the stragglers. I mean, we heard in these meeting sessions and discussions. So there is a problem in Venezuela, and it's not just. I mean, of course, you cannot accept a president is kidnapped, a colonialism. So we need to make very clear against imperialism, against colonialism, against dictatorships, and for human rights, freedom, because freedom was not the key words in Venezuela before, and not today neither. And also the elections. We were not, I mean, we said in general, there were elections in Venezuela, and they were not clearly presented. I mean, it was an opposition, and with elections, and the regime, the dictatorial regime in Venezuela, whatever we can qualify ideologically, but not presented. I need to name today Maduro for the time, not presented the clear results, I mean, that were asked by all the international community. So what now? Well, we cannot compete. I mean, resistance, of course, there are resistance, and we need the resistance to imperialism. There are resistance or said sharements of resistance in other parts of the world, from inside in United States, from the working class of work. We need all that, and that is crucial, and not only in United States. That is crucial, this kind of resistance. But in Venezuela today, we need to keep in mind that we need also a Pacific, without, I mean, massacre, killing people perhaps for nothing. We need a normalization of the situation, and with forces, political forces, from freedom, from democracy, that could normalize, and then Venezuelan, the people from Venezuela could elect and make their choice. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Norma. Finn.
Comrades, I want to begin by thanking Federico for an informative and interesting open contribution. And I want to start by just repeating the point he made, that the old way of doing things is gone. That's what's happening now under the US. It's the same policy. It hasn't changed. Intervention, domination, the lack of respect for any international norms, that's always been there. There's been invasions by the US throughout history. But what's happening now is it's more naked, more open, and more stated in advance what's going to happen. I don't think many people foresaw that when MAGA, Make America Great Again, was put forward as a slogan, we didn't think, I think a lot of people, that what that meant was the complete and absolute involvement and dominance by American imperialism in every aspect of world affairs. I don't think we foresaw that. I want to make a couple of general points about Latin America in general. And for 300 years, the countries of Latin America were dominated by Spain and Portugal. And various alliances at various times were formed between the countries of South America as a way of cooperating and escaping from that. But the US established then themselves through the Monroe Doctrine, but in 1823 under the President Monroe. But again, we need to realize that that policy has persisted throughout from the very beginning of the American states, this dominance, and it's happened many times that they've intervened. In terms of purchase, the Treaty of Hidalgo, which gave Texas and Mexico, sorry, not Texas, Mexico and Spain, which gave the U.S. California and New Mexico. The Louisiana Purchase Agreement with the French Republic gave the U.S. an entire swathe of country from Canada right down to Louisiana. The Alaska was purchased from Russia by the U.S. The Philippines, Puerto Rico, Panama was purchased. So this policy of taking over other countries is not new. In fact, it's probably not widely known, but Trump made a mess of this when he was trying to explain it. He was referring to Greenland as Iceland. The guy hasn't a clue about issues of that nature. But there was an agreement reached in World War II between Denmark and the US, where the US would get a protectorate over Greenland. It didn't belong to them as a colony, but there was an agreement that they would have a protectorate over that. Trump represents that as the Americans having once owned Greenland and given it voluntarily back. There was an agreement between Denmark and the US about that. The issue of Maduro is a significant point as well. Maduro was a tyrant. There was mass imprisonment, torture. 8 million people emigrated from Venezuela. Now, I'm not implying in any way that Trump was justified in the intervention. On the contrary, we're all united against Trump's intervention. That's not an issue at all. But we can't end up supporting Maduro as a socialist. He was not in any way a socialist. He was a tyrant. And he also fiddled the result of the election in 1923. In 2023. The election that was won by the left was seized. The result was seized by Maduro illegally, declaring himself as the victory. The issue of Maduro in some representing continuity with Chavez is wrong. Incidentally, Chavez as well, in his latter period before he died, was also moving away from the reforms, the significant reforms he introduced himself initially, such as using oil revenues to improve the living standards of the poor people of Venezuela. A tremendous advance. But towards the end of his life, he was really going back, reversing some of these measures. But Maduro, on the contrary, was a tyrant of the kind of, there's nothing to be said, whatever, in his defense. America uses the word socialist to discredit Maduro, but in no way was he in any way a socialist. He was a tyrant. And it's just unfortunate that the people of Venezuela and the left-wing groups in Venezuela didn't succeed in overthrowing him and establishing a left-wing regime and enabled Trump to pretend that in some way America was a benevolent force. It's also worth commenting that there's a kind of an acceptance internationally in the discourse that in the past the US operated as a benevolent force in the world. And if only we could return to that again and get away from the ideas of Trump. There's continuity between American imperialism's role in the past and what Trump has done today. The difference is, as Federico referred to, is that now they openly disregard international agreements, they openly disregard the United Nations decisions, but haven't they always done that? And anybody who's unsure about that, just look at what's happening in Israel, where all the laws of all international laws and laws on humanity and human rights have all been thrown out the window with the support of Trump. I want to make a point which maybe the Argentinian comrades, perhaps Norma or Federico himself, might comment on. Like Trotskyism had a huge base in South America. in several countries in the past. Now they've lost that base now, but we need to look at the reasons why did that happen. The Fourth International, which was founded in 1938, had lots of members in South America in various countries, principally in Argentina. And when the Fourth International split into principally two factions initially, that caused a lot of damage. They continued to split, but at various times they regained a bit of a foothold. There were big organizations, some of them with mass support or quite a significant degree of support, some with influence in government. The two major factions, the one was Pablo de Posadas group. In fact, when I was working in London, a friend of mine was a member of the Fourth International Group in London, the International Marxist Group, as it was called. And when somebody said to him that I was a member, was involved with the militant group in London, his first reaction was, "Oh, the Pabloites. I knew nothing about the Pabloites. Nothing. I know about them now, of course. I made a point of finding out. But the Pabloites or Pablo was a leader of one of the sections that split in the Fourth International. But I just use that as an illustration. The language that is often spoken on the left is not understood by ordinary people. So the Trotskyist movement kept splitting, even though it was very significant, and particularly in Argentina, which the comrades can tell me about. There was a very strong Trotskyist movement. There was a division then in the movement between armed struggle and mass organization. And that split was evident in Argentina, where a workers' party emerged from that kind of a split. They decided in the international that the armed struggle is the only way forward in South America, and that was discredited. After Castro's victory in 1959, there was a swing back towards this notion that armed struggle is the way to do things. A handful of people with a few bombs and stuff of that nature can change society. And then that was shown to be false. But the result is that Trotskyism went from being a main part of a movement in South America to being discredited. There were big movements in Argentina, in Peru, in Bolivia, led by Marxists and Trotskyists, but also in terms of the Communist Party. There were significant communist parties in many countries. The first communist party was in Chile, I think it was founded in 1921. But then if you look at the history of the Chilean Communist Party, particularly during the period 70 to 73, the coalition, the Popular Unity government, where they made all kinds of concessions and stuff. Now they were violently overthrown by the coup under Pinochet, but nonetheless, the Popular Front government made agreements with the Radical Party, other parties, and lost track of the main function of communist parties or socialist parties, which was to take power and establish a socialist society. So the Communist Party, which did have a base, also lost its base in society. There was a significant Communist Party, which Federico referred to in Venezuela. I'd like to hear perhaps a bit more about how it evolved and developed and faded. And as I say, I'd like to hear as well about the Argentinian Trotskyist movement and how the various factions of it split and what happened to them since. The main lessons of that have to be learned. We can't just describe it. I'm not describing it as just a historical anachronism. We need to analyze why is it that the Trotskyist movement, which was so significant in South America, split and drifted and became almost irrelevant. And again, why is it that the communist parties, which are significant across South America, also split and moved into coalition arrangements and all kinds of Popular Front arrangements with right-wing parties? We need to analyze that. And just one final point then about Venezuela itself, the future. I don't know where the future lies in terms of the perspectives. Now, Federico has explained about the growth of a left-wing movement within Venezuela, which is significant. I'd like to hear a little bit more. What's the relationship between that movement as it's developing? Now, maybe it's not possible to answer these questions fully now, but what's the relationship between them and the trade union movement, which have always been strong in South American countries? What's that relationship? And also community groups and mass organizations in Venezuela. How are they coming together behind this popular movement? And this woman, Machado, the woman who just bowed the knee to Trump, it's difficult to even listen to or watch the craven way in which she has approached Trump. After Trump told her that she doesn't deserve or shouldn't be elected in Venezuela because she doesn't have mass support. It was she who was banned from standing for election by Maduro. And in her absence, a man called Gonzalez, I think was his name, stood and won the election. So this woman whom Trump describes as having no base, not being strong, even though that's rubbish, it's not been challenged. And I'd like to hear a bit more. Now, I can see how Machado might have lost support, particularly with this Nobel Prize humiliation that she went through, handing over a Nobel Prize to Trump. I mean, for God's sake, what more craven attitude can be adopted? But I'd like to hear a bit more about what kind of base is there for resistance in Venezuela. And I'd say that most people welcome the fact that Maduro is gone, but they wouldn't welcome the way in which it was done. There wouldn't be support in any kind of broad sense at all for an invasion by Trump and his forces. But there would be a lot of opposition to Maduro, and I can see why there isn't a big uprising to defend him. And I noticed that Trump uses language because he's skilled in media. He's a bit of an ageist on most issues, but in terms of language, he's clever. He uses the word capture specifically in order to create the impression it's a police operation. Now, he uses the word patriots for the ICE people who have been creating havoc in Minnesota and other places, because patriots, again, the language he uses stimulates that kind of a reaction. And then he uses this peace committee for the new gang that's supposed to be running global affairs, because the word peace creates the illusion that this is a group of something to do with peace. It's nothing to do with peace. It's a bunch of dictators and tyrants from across the globe. So there's a few questions and a few comments there, comrades. Thanks again, Federico.
Thanks, Finn. Harry, you're next. I see that Norma and Ian both want to come back, but I think first Eric hasn't spoken yet. So Harry, then Eric, and then we'll move on to the other comrades.
Yes, yes.
Yeah. Hi, comrades. What's it all about? America kidnapped Maduro, has now got a puppet regime now in Venezuela that is working with the CIA, as Rodrigo said. Rodriguez welcomed the head of the CIA to our country. And but for America, what's in it for them? You see, the oil, the largest reserves, I mean, after the kidnapping of Maduro, Trump invited the heads of the oil corporations and discussed with them what would they do. Would they invest in Venezuela? And the CEO of Exxon made it clear. He says, there's nothing out. We can't invest in a country that's destabilized and needs a huge amount of resources to get the oil. And there isn't any. There was no plan. There was no strategic plan set up previously on the reason why they would want to go after, take control of Venezuela and seize the oil. It's not there. And they're now left in a position, okay, any other reason. I mean, some of the oil is going to America. It's not a great deal. They're seizing oil in the Caspian Sea. They're taking oil, they're selling it. The funds is going to Qatar, and those funds are controlled by Trump. Now, what happens to those funds? Well, we don't actually know what's going to happen, but certainly it's going to be under the control of Trump. Getting rid of Maduro certainly has severed the very close relationship that he had with Putin. As far as China relies on about 10% of its oil from Venezuela, but that oil is still going to China. It hasn't interrupted them. And you ask yourself, what is all this about? And it comes down more and more that you have to realize that America, this is the most corrupt American administration in history. And it's not about, and this is maybe where I differ from maybe Finn's analysis there, it's not about making America great again. It's about making some people extremely rich again. I mean, to go off the topic or just to another place, take Greenland, for example. When Trump actually threatened military intervention in Greenland, he did a U-turn because the stock market crashed. one of the biggest stock market in 5 years. It wiped $1 trillion out of the Dow Jones and so on. There, he did a complete U-turn there. But if you listen to the president, B.D. Vance, what he was saying, well, we need Greenland for a base to protect our national security. America has 4 bases. They once had something like 17 or 18 bases, but now 4. And they have a satellite navigation in Greenland that effectively detects potential missiles coming towards America and so on. But then you realize what it's all about. He goes on to talk about the Golden Dome, this massive new investment that's going to enrich corporations that provide money to the Trump's re-election campaign and to Trump himself. They provide money to both Trump himself and to the administration. Now, this new system that they're talking about, Trump says is about 150 billion, but there's estimates put it over $1 trillion. And you can see what the intervention in Greenland, it's not about old-style colonialism. The more and more you look at this is sheer corruption. It's not about making America great again. It's not about making the country big again. The debts and so on, they don't give a damn what's happening to the people, where inflation is going now through the roof and about to go through the roof. They don't care. The farmers that have lost their exports to China, they don't care. It all comes down, the more and more you look at this, is about financing the pockets of a few people around Trump. And these interventions that are taking place, particularly in Venezuela, which is no exception, that's going to line their pockets. All the degrees is leading towards that. They're in a position, there's nothing going to be, I think there's not going to be, America's not going to intervene and invest heavily in Venezuela. It's not going to happen. Whether or not they clamp down of the internal revolt that's now taking place in Venezuela, all of that will have to be panned out, but I think they will provide and they will lean on the Venezuelan government to repress what's now happening in the country. So what I'm saying is that this is not old-style colonialism. The way they intervened in Iraq in 2003, what did they do? They seized the oil, second largest oil reserves. They made conditions better for American corporations to get more money out of a nationalized oil industry in Iraq. That was the whole point of that invasion. This invasion has got corruption written all over it, short-term gain, no strategic plan put in place about what's going to happen really afterwards, because there isn't one. And this is the mindset of this American administration under Trump. The empire is dying, it's declining, and it really is what they can get out of this empire as it declines. Thanks, Roger.
All right, thank you, Harry. I'm going to call in Eric now, and if comrades don't mind, I would like to make a small contribution after that, and then Ian and Norma, I know both want to speak again, and that will still leave plenty of time for other comrades if any other comrades want to come in. So, if comrades are okay with that. Eric, you're next.
Good morning, everyone, and thank you, Federico, for the lead off. I'm going to try to not repeat. There's been some really meaty, important things said, and I'm not really, because I'm not in Venezuela, and I read the same things you do. I won't theorize much about what I see or what I believe, but I do think there is a bit of a strategy. I'm going to say just a bit about this, and that has mostly to do with the role of currency, not oil. And I think that a lot of what the Trump people are doing in the Western Hemisphere, and insofar as they're doing things in the rest of the world, it's about trying to muscle and bully as much as possible to continue different societies using the dollar. So that's just a theory. I don't know that I can prove it, but I think that's actually an important point. So I'm mostly going to just talk about what I'm seeing here in the U.S. Unfortunately, Trotskyist ideas, good class-conscious ideas are not center in the movement, insofar as there is one, against the snatching of Maduro. It's a lot of this kind of, Castroism, third worldism, campism. There are people like me and others. I know that many of you know Alan Akravos. He did a presentation here. I know that Federico's been in touch with him. He and I have been in touch, speaking into DSA, which is sort of where young activists meet in the U.S. There aren't a lot of voices. The arguments are a lot of guilt and just kind of very middle class, which is disappointing, but, we do the best we can. I do want to say a little bit about, it's a little bit off topic, but maybe not so much, it's related, is this state repression. So there have been 2 killings here in the last few weeks, and lots of arrests, a lot of beatings. There in Minnesota. That's happened other places too. This is a bit different. People, love to talk about, this is a complete departure. There's a lot of this in U.S. history. We're an armed society. The state is quite violent, and the history of racism is well known and very deep here in the U.S. That notwithstanding, building up ICE to larger than most of the world's militaries is something to notice. So just kind of as a little bit of an allegory. So I went with some activists from the Teachers Union here in Oakland. I live in Oakland, California, which is a part of the San Francisco Bay Area, to a heavily Latino part of Oakland yesterday to seek support for they're in a negotiation process, and they may go on strike soon. Overwhelming support, just by the way. This neighborhood is overwhelmingly people from Latin America, particularly Central Americans, people from Guatemala and El Salvador, Mexicans as well, and others, but it's mostly Guatemalans and El Salvadorans. And it's interesting to notice because ICE isn't here. The U.S. state isn't omniscient. They can't be everywhere. There are limits to their power, though it's horrifying what's happening in Minnesota. They're not here. And so the fear isn't here. Immigrants aren't hiding the way they are in other parts of the U.S. And the population has come out to support. Federico mentions other people are aware of this just by the mainstream news. And that's been particularly good in Minnesota. And there's some unusual things about the history of Minnesota. Some of you might know there was a general strike there. That's a little tiny piece of the U.S. where there's actually a bit of an organized left that actually has some roots in the working class, kind of unusual in the U.S., but Minnesota, Minneapolis. So this is a bit of a test case for the Trump government. And I'm looking at all this bellicose talk about Greenland, the snatching of Maduro and his wife, and this ridiculously heavy-handed, it's also worth mentioning, these immigration sweeps are nowhere near as efficient. Not that I'm saying deportation is a good thing, but under the Obama administration, they did something called soft deportation, where they would give employers lists. They would do verifies about people's social security numbers, and any that weren't real, they would say, well, this is obviously not a real number. You need to fire this person. So employers would fire undocumented people, and they would often leave the country without all this drama, without submachine guns and tackling people. So clearly there's a bit of a different agenda here, and it's all about increasing a control here in the United States and I'm trying not to repeat what other people said, it's for an increased extraction out of the U.S., like gutting the working class, the middle class. I'm sorry that's impressionistic and disorganized, but there are limits to what they can do, well, anyway, that's enough. Thank you, Federico, for your talk. And I guess in conclusion, I'm going to say that there's a few of us that I think here in the U.S. understand correctly that what we need to be saying is the U.S., and this, I imagine, maybe echoes in Europe. Obviously, it's a very different narrative in Latin America, but we oppose any kind of foreign military interventions. We don't want the U.S. military anywhere in the world. Unfortunately, a lot of the movement raises different narratives that aren't class conscious, that aren't tied to transitional things like shortening the work week or raising wages. So anyway, that's what I got. Thank you so much. I look forward to hearing the sum up.
No, thank you, Eric. As usual, very, very interesting contribution. If there are any comrades who haven't spoken yet who want to, I'll call them first. Otherwise, Ian and Norma, if you'd I would like to make a very short contribution first. And maybe you would like to comment on that. I want to put this in first of all, I think the information that Federico and other comrades have given has been absolutely, very, very useful. And I don't really want to say any more about that, but I'd like to talk about the context, the global context. I think we have to take this as a very conscious and calculated step towards, by Trump and by American imperialism, towards the recapture of the entire subcontinent. And I think we need to say that this is not a question of increasing. It's not really trying to uh, increase the power of American imperialism globally. I think actually we have to see it in a way as a retreat. It's a retreat and a consolidation of what it considers to be its own patch, its own hemisphere. Because Trump has declared in so many words, he said it's a return to the Monroe doctrine, as which Finn referred to too, and even made the kind of bullying joke that he makes, called it the Donroe doctrine. In other words, to say that the whole of the it's a reassertion of total US domination of the Western Hemisphere. But in terms of world strategy, I actually think we see it as a bit of a retreat from its ambitions. From 1991 until now, the strategy of American imperialism was to say we run the world now. History is over. American imperialism has triumphed. There was no opposition, and of course, since that time, there's been the astronomical, absolutely dynamic growth of China economically, and in fact, by some calculations, including by the World Bank, according to the criteria of the actual purchasing power, China actually is calculated as number one of the world economies, and in fact, the Asian countries constitute three of the top five in the world. And I think what this is actually an admission by American imperialism that we can't uh, maintain the role that we had before of pacifying and controlling the entire world. And so, what has happened? It's a new redivision of the world in which Europe is left to kind of fend for itself rather than shelter under the American umbrella. Try to make some kind of accommodation with Russia in the hope at least of neutralizing it when it comes to a conflict with its main challenger and its main enemy, which is China. And as far as China itself is concerned, not at this stage to confront it, but to contain it, to maintain a presence in the Pacific in order to be ready in case it comes or when it comes to a conflict later. As far as Latin America is concerned, I mean, after all, Trump is now claiming not only taking control in the most brutal and bullying way, actually went and kidnapping the president and abducting him, but actually has his sight on Brazil, on Argentina, of course. Argentina, they've already had they've won that battle for the time being with an extremely odious and obnoxious
We
puppet of
elected a
theirs.
puppet government.
Yes, exactly. And of course, then there's also he's got his eye well, he's won a victory in Chile for at least a step towards a victory on in relation to Chile, Ecuador, Bolivia, Colombia. They're all on the list, and he's actually now directly threatening Colombia, Panama, Mexico, even Cuba, and beyond that, expanding the Western Hemisphere, what he calls the Western Hemisphere, to take over if he can. At least he's talking in those terms of Greenland and even Canada, and therefore that's the I think the strategy that Trump is trying to operate to say, right, that's our patch, the Western Hemisphere, the Western half of the world, that belongs to us. The rest we try to, we'll curb our ambitions to a certain extent, but always bearing in mind the preparation for an inevitable future conflict with China. That's really the main point I wanted to make. I think also it relates to the needs of American capitalism and industry. I think there's no prospect that they can bring back the kind of industrial production that they had in the past. America is largely a de-industrialized society, as is Britain. But I think that the aim also is to exploit the South American working class and to use that as cheap labor, and in order to build up under the domination and control and ownership of American companies, in order to actually to boost their economy on the basis not of American working class anymore, but of the working class and the potential working class within Latin America too. I also agree with I can't remember. I think was it Phil? I can't remember one of the comrades who said that of course they failed. If he ever had any ambition to take over the oil industry of Venezuela, it's simply not worth it for the American oil companies because there's a glut of oil in any case at the present time. There's oil is very cheap as well, and the type of oil apparently that is available in Venezuela is very heavy and crude and viscous and very difficult to exploit. It would take an enormous investment, technological investment, and it's simply not worth it for the oil companies to do that at the present time, when there's plenty of oil around and the price is so cheap. It simply wouldn't make sense. So those are some of the points I wanted to make. Right, Ian, then Norma, and please let me know if there's any other comrades who want to speak.
All right,
Matthew,
thanks.
yes,
There
sorry.
is Matthew.
Matthew.
There is Matthew too.
Well,
Right.
Matthew, yes, maybe you should come in first, then Ian, then Norma. Thanks,
Okay.
Norma. That's very self-sacrificing of you.
All right. Thanks, comrades. Yeah. I think I don't agree with Roger. I think that the question here is not some calculation on the part of the Trump regime. It's actually desperation. What we're actually looking at is the decline of US imperialism. That it is, under conditions in which, if you look at it, Chinese manufacturing has twice as much of a share of the world, at least world manufacturing, than the US. Okay, the US is still in control. I mean, it's still the hegemon, but obviously you can see that the end game has been written. It's quite clear. And so you see, I mean, obviously then you're driven to these desperate measures. I mean, what it's doing, actually, of course, when you look at it historically, what you see, of course, is that the US does have this domination after World War II, and you do have Stalinism and the existence of the Stalinist countries and the historic function of the Stalinist countries in order to stabilize capitalism and kill revolutionaries, which is what they did. The thing is here that under those conditions, of course, they try to solve their problems by lashing out. And what the US is doing, of course, is attempting to, as hegemon, is to leave additional tribute even out of the secondary imperialist countries, whether that's Canada or Europe or wherever else, by using assorted measures and bullying and tariffs. I mean, tariffs are effectively tariffs at the levels that Trump uses are essentially an act of war against countries. I mean, it's not not sort of a casual sort of thing. You turn up and say, well, we want to destroy your markets. That's an act of war. In normal times. Okay, we don't live in normal times. So then, of course, also the whole question of saying, well, okay, as comrades have made clear, I mean, clearly, the US has had a long-term effort to get hold of Greenland, but it clearly has, under the conditions in which, the deal post-Second World War, in which the US controlled the world, and they've built all these different institutions, and part of that deal was to say, well, the Americans can have as many bases as they want on Greenland, and they did have, huge quite numbers. Now they've only got one. They clearly weren't that bothered. So I mean, and the same. You can see the same in terms of Canada. And so it's the efforts to try and levy this additional tribute, and of course, obviously, as people have seen, to go towards World War III. Now, it does leave Europe in a position, clearly, obviously, at one point, having lost the war now with Russia, and we're yet to see the fallout from this in terms of the fact that the Ukraine proxy war has been lost, and at the same time having this additional tribute being constantly demanded by the Americans, and then the Americans also demanding, of course, that they play a part in preparation for World War III against China. It does put Europe in an extraordinary position. And we see that sort of evolution. You can see the evolution, particularly obviously in Germany and France and so on, saying, okay, well, we will move away from the US and from these assorted structures and so on, the World War II settlement. Now, the thing in terms of South America, of course, is the fact that the political forces have failed. I mean, when we see, a strike on Venezuela, is of course all of the bits and pieces of countries like Brazil and all these generally trying to face the other way and say, well, nothing to do with us. Lula and these people, nothing to do with us. We don't like Maduro at all anyway. Rather than say, well, no, actually, of course, whether you like Maduro or not is another matter. It's the fact that this isn't, a direct challenge to the existence, sovereignty, democracy, and all the rest of it in Latin America. These kind of things will be done, rather than making any of that point. And I think the other thing, of course, is the perfidy of the Maduro regime itself, which was quite clear. It was a deal. It was a deal to cough him up. You can't fly helicopters into a major capital city and see none of them shot down without a deal. There's a deal to give him away, and then the CIA arrives, and the head of the CIA arrives to dictate terms to Rodriguez. Quite clearly, that all of that was done in advance. This is the kind of regime we're dealing with. But it's under conditions, obviously, in which there's this major attack on the working class. I mean, whether that's in Latin America or the US, and we have to see also, there's no difference. There's no difference between the struggle to get ICE off the streets of the US, to prevent the US from attacking Venezuela, or to limit the attack on Venezuela. And of course, obviously, that the US has been the central supplier of a genocide which it is not, some kind of mild supporter of. Is actually centrally involved. This genocide is a US genocide as much as it's an Israeli genocide, as much as it's a British genocide. All of these imperial powers are centrally involved in that attempt to wipe out Palestine. There's not a degree of difference between any of them. and the kind of criminality that's involved in front of the eyes of the world. People have to take extremely seriously. Thanks.
Right, thanks, Matthew. We do have one more comrade who hasn't spoken yet. I'll call Dominic, then Norma, then Ian, if that's okay.
Yeah, I'm going to be very brief, I think. I mean, the first thing that strikes me about the snatch or the kidnapping of the president of Venezuela is the fact that in Latin America, there's nobody can't be aware of the fact of the role of the United States, whether it's with Allende or whether it's a Bay of Pigs or whatever intervention they've made. And the thing that really strikes me about the kidnapping, the only deaths I've heard of are of Cuban guards. I've not heard of any Venezuelan, of any injury, of any drop of blood being dropped. And it sort of reminds me of the song by Robbie Burns, just changing it slightly. His song was "We're bought and sold by English gold." I think you can say it was "We're bought and sold by American gold." That was the situation there. And the big thing about it from the state's point of view, or from Trump's point of view, is it putting a marker down. Who is going to stand up against him, knowing that he can do that? All right, he's got to buy his way in. But given the fact that no left-wing government in Latin America or anywhere else in the world, to my knowledge, has ever looked to the working class to defend the state. They've looked to the bourgeois institutions that were already there before they took power. And that's the situation they're in, and you can't trust those gentlemen and ladies very far. I think the other thing that I'd touch on is this thing about ICE. I mean, I see ICE as a similar organisation to the Black and Tans in Ireland, who could operate completely outside the law in their attempt to smash the IRA. Now, in America, there's no armed opposition to Trump or to the state, but there is opposition to Trump. And in a couple of years or 3 years' time, we'll have an election. But Trump will have his black and tans on the ground to ensure that if he actually bothers with an election, that he's elected. And if he doesn't bother with an election and just announce himself a continuation for the third term, that he's got an army on the streets that's going to ensure that takes place. So I thought I'd just make those couple of points. And just on this thing about, it's only a very small point, but for the first time, I heard the BBC refer to America as the world's #1 military power, not the world's #1 economic power. And I thought that's a change that that they've slipped in there. So there's just a few small points I just thought I'd raise.
Yeah, thanks. Interesting points, Dominic. Norma or Ian, who wants to go first?
I think it was going to be me. But yeah, I just wanted to come back on Jimmy mainly on or was it Finn? Sorry, on Machado. Just something I should have probably mentioned something about her before. Anyway, I think you're certainly half right in terms of her absolutely craven to comical, this vomit-inducing degree, donating her Nobel Peace Prize to Trump in order to campaign for more aggression against her own country. But I think that maybe points to where I'm not so sure of. I agree factually, and it is just a question of factual analysis, and obviously we'll see what evidence comes out on the ground. But I don't think that she's as popular as her liberal outriders and neocon outriders in the West and the United States and the global North make her out to be. I think when Trump got up and said that, and I was surprised that she's not very popular, she's not got a base, I think he'd probably seen the CIA reports that people at that level must have access to, the sober assessment of what they can and can't get away with, that if they'd just gone in and put her in as the president, it would be an Iraq situation, total societal collapse. And that he presumably would have, if he could have, because someone as craven as to give their Nobel Prize to him is obviously going to be a very easy partner to deal with and control. So I think there was obviously a lot of liberalism about when Trump didn't get the Nobel Prize. People who didn't know very much maybe thought it was one in the eye for Trump, especially since she's a woman and her ethnicity as a Latino. But then her actual record is she's the extreme wing of the right. She's like a Malay. She's a big supporter of Netanyahu. And her victory in this internal opposition primary that I think was referred to showed that that wing was plumping for the most extreme right-wing candidate, a bit like Trump taking over the Republican Party or a number of other obvious examples around the world. And then in terms of the election itself, I think if she did win this, not just win, but she claimed her candidate got like 70% of the vote. If that was anywhere near true, I think they would have tried to put her in. I think in terms of Delcy Rodriguez, she's walking a tightrope, whether faithful or traitor. If she would all out resisted America's nuclear power in her backyard under an unhinged leader, it would kind of call that bluff at this point, it seems. If she was all out, yes, I denounce Maduro, I support Trump, she'd probably be overthrown by her own base. So it's in some ways hard to tell intention. And that's why I looked at things like inviting Craig Murray, still recognising Maduro. I think in terms of deaths, Trump initially said there were no deaths at all. There were 30 Cubans then announced dead, but I think 100 overall. So I think there were some Venezuelans putting up a fight. I think obviously there was some internal treason, but that doesn't necessarily mean it was the deputy. Was an agent of another country, just like if Trump got impeached, it wouldn't make Vance, sadly, an agent of Venezuela. And I think we have to look at each situation concretely. So I don't think Maduro was like the Stalin to Chavez's Lenin, for example. I also think it's a different situation from Iran, where the government doesn't make any claims to socialism. And where even in Iran, I thought the Mann's report was very good last week, that there was legitimate grievances and real protests starting out, but then there was also Mossad gun running and the royalists trying to take over the revolt or the protests and turn it into a violent thing. And I think that Machado is basically the Reza Pahlavi kind of figure of Venezuela, rather than anything to do with a popular or even popular in either sense of the word, shall we say, alternative.
Right. Thanks, Ian. Karel, you haven't spoken yet. Norma, you've been very patient, but I haven't forgotten you, okay?
I'll be very quick. I mean, I didn't really want to speak particularly, but because it's been so fantastic. I've made so many pages of notes listening to everybody, and a particular thank you to Federico. What's made me want to speak is this. Someone said that no leader in South America had looked to the working class to stop, the army or military coups or whatever, and stop America behind them. And I don't think that's quite true. When America, the CIA, wanted to get rid of Hugo Chavez, they orchestrated a coup. And Chavez was a military man. He was taken by a section of the army, and the central palace of, I think it's called Miraflores in Caracas, was closed down, and the government, Chavez's government, were under fire. And they did call upon the working class in Caracas and across Venezuela to come out in support of Chavez, and they did. And there were armed battles in the street, and Chavez was reinstated by another section of the army. Now, I don't know how the Bolivarian revolution under Chavez in Venezuela degenerated. I don't know about that. But if you've not seen the film called The Revolution Will Be Televised, you should watch it, because it's live streaming of the attempted coup by America and the CIA in Venezuela. And it is very inspiring how ordinary people came out in support of all the gains that Chavez had made, particularly around health and education, where 80-year-old people were learning to read for the first time. Just one other quick point. Yeah, I think it's true that Trump is a gangster. He has no limits, and I think that's increasingly dawning on people. It is, as has been said, is not old-style colonialism, but it's not just about oil. It is about control. There are issues around the currency, which I think Eric alluded to, but there's also issues around real estate opportunities, and Trump has mentioned this himself. There is hundreds of miles of totally unspoilt golden beaches in Venezuela. And I think that offers opportunities for real estate corporations to go in, and money will flow illegally into, offshore accounts that have most really got billions in for Trump and his family. But they are like the Sopranos, but much, much worse.
Thanks, Karel. Norma, do you want to speak?
Thank you very much. I agree with what you, Roger, said, and also Finn, and because Finn raised some important questions to us. In particular, he addressed directly to people, as he said, people here in Argentina or in South America. I need perhaps to make some points. And of course, I also agree with Karel. I mean, what all she said about Trump and all that. But I think that for us, I think for myself, what is important is, of course, we can continue. I mean, we have clearly what is Trump and what is imperialism today. And I think the next document by Roger and Wynne will address to that. But what is important, I mean, I think what is urgent is to recognize and to know what we do, what we did or not did, and what we must do in terms of, not only in terms of resistance, because for some situations, but in terms of organizations. Are what are the keys of that those organizations in the different countries and different struggles, in different situations which have common denominators around the world? We have seen from Philippines, said from one antipodal part of South America till South America today. So Finn addressed why Trotskyism, a movement which was so Trotsky, and then addressed communism in general, or communism organization, parties, if you want, which was so important in South America in particular, and have split and continue to split, and in particular in Argentina. And must to say that Trotskyism, which was so important in the 70s, even in Europe and in France in the 60s too. I must to say that as the whole left, in particular, and more, I mean, what is called communism, have not evolved in the sense, or have not went in the evolution of what peoples and what the world around were transforming and were evolving or involving, said in some situations, and then catched some rights, and which is good, I mean, some new rights, but the working classes, because that was transformed and it still is transformed, were not in the center, even if in discourses, in the concepts, in the theory, but were not in the centers of the practicals and or the elections or the forms to organize the takes of power, local, regional, and national or international. In particular, in Argentina, Trotskyism, which is much more divided in many, I mean, we don't know perhaps now all the different divisions had. It's not so important. It's not because have some few representatives in some councils. It's not so important in Argentina in particular. And that must say too that with all the left in Argentina, continuously to, at least publicly, I mean, I think I am aware, I mean, of what, supported publicly all these Venezuela regimes. I mean, the last, and were not clearly putting all the situation, the real situations, even with the Venezuelan who are, I mean, there are a lot of Venezuelans now outside the country to try to work with them, because not all these people is left the country because they are the extreme right. It's not the case. So there is a make a real analysis and a real take of the reality. Even in France, the trade unions, I mean, important trade unions or working class organization, which is the Confédération Nationale du Travail, CGT, with many people, and very important, make a realistic, I said about Venezuela, said today, also for Iran, and it was, and that have real basis, a working basis. I can speak from first hand in there. And they were, and the president or the leader of the CGT, the trade union, was attacked by the left, I mean the Trotskyist left in France, because she, by saying she was not enough supporting Maduro. I mean, which is a real paradox, but I mean, this is just the news today. So about the evolution or the involution, we need to take clear also some items. With this, I finish. I mean, oil or not oil. Trump or not Trump, Machado or not Machado, Nobel Prize or not Nobel Prize. Recall, Kissinger got a Nobel Prize of Peace, and we know in Latin America what was the role of Mr. Kissinger in Chile, for instance, in Argentina too, with it. So we need, with that or without that, I mean, those concepts, those people today or in the past, but the concepts are, at least for me and for my own experience in some sense or theory, we need not to forget some common denominator which appeared in all these struggles, or in those events, in all these situations we have seen here in these WIM meetings. I mean, people from one part of the, one antipodal part said the East Orient or the South ASEAN or the ASEAN and the global South, and also now from the North, came for human rights, freedom, not poverty, not corruption, big word, which also was forget in Latin America from said many parts of the left. And you see, I mean, you have memory here to know what the people from the struggle and all the young and not so young in the different working students, universities said, and freedom, for freedoms, against corruption, not a violation of human rights. And I think this, of course, diversities and new rights and organization, that is the basis. We need to take into account that. With that, I finish, Roger, I finish. Because human rights was considered a so soft concept. No, the left did not want to take about. And it was enough, and it was human rights too, which help strongly to fall down a dictatorship, in particular in Argentina. So do you remember? I mean, mothers and not mothers, but so thank you very much.
No, thank you, Norma. Thanks very much. And Comrade Federico, you've got plenty of points to to reply to. So you take as much time as you need, but if you can try to do it within 10, 15 minutes, then we can just about keep to our normal time.
I'll get to as many things as I get to.
Okay.
One quick thing about the whole debate around the general analysis of what imperialism is trying to do, etc. I think we need to speculate, analyze, debate, crash different ideas. We need to keep doing that. A lot of what Roger said and others, what are Trump's intentions? Is it defensive? Is it this? I think it's an important debate to be having, because we don't know the answers to a lot of that. And it's through that debate that we're going to. And if I get to it, I'll say a couple of things about it, but at least wanted to say that it is an important discussion to continue finding it. Venezuela. I mean, I'll go straight to Venezuela. And I feel many comrades responded to Ian's first intervention, but I think it's the most important discussion because it's obviously everything and anything we say about Venezuela today begins by rejecting the U.S. intervention and the kidnapping of Maduro. We demand his release, etc. It doesn't matter who he is, what he is, etc. We had the same opinion of Saddam Hussein in 2003. Only the people of Venezuela have the right to do what they need to do with their tyrant, and nothing better than a tyrant will come from the hands of U.S. imperialism. So in every case, we begin by rejecting that. Now, as many said, that does not mean we have to support him politically. That does not mean we have to apologize for what his regime actually was. It does not mean we have to attempt to explain the unexplainable, because Carol made the comparison with 2002. There's something in common between Saddam Hussein. I brought him up because I remembered him in this discussion with Maduro. Both of them had turned into tyrants that oppressed and repressed brutally and ruined the lives of millions of their working people. And so when the U.S. imperialism came for them, no one came out to defend them. In 2002, We were there. We were we were leading members of that whole process from the very beginning. I mean, the main leader, one of the main leaders of Maria Socialista today, who is now exiled by Maduro. He's exiled in Spain because he was going to be imprisoned if he didn't leave. He's the one who, when Chavez was released from prison in 1994, organized the rally in front of the, we have the photo, in front of the prison where he was released, and handed him presented him and handed him the bullhorn to speak. In 2002, even Chavez turned himself, thought he was lost. And the people came out, and there was an organization because there was something to defend. It was in self-defense. It's always in self-defense that the masses will pour into the streets, risk their lives, and confront imperialism who has atomic bombs and everything. It's always in self-defense. If they have nothing to defend, they won't do it. That's why they did not go out in the streets. And a lot was said about oil. Obviously this was happened. The revolution was derailed, but it's not just objective factors, because the price of oil could have lowered around 2011, 2012 of all commodities. Actually, the whole pink wave. I mean, Kirchner, Lula, Evo, Chavez, Correa, all of them have something in common. They were able, as reformist projects, to give huge concessions and improvements in the lives of millions in their countries, while at the same time guaranteeing huge profits for the bourgeoisie in their countries, because of the extraordinarily high prices of commodities. All of them began to reverse some of their main politics, began to apply austerity, began to have some repressive measures when the price of commodities came down. And one aspect is the objective part, that oil prices, soy prices, gas prices came down. But the key one is, what do you do at that moment? Because you have a choice. You have a choice. For an extraordinary period, you could do both things: give people things and guarantee profits. When there's not enough to do both things, you have to choose one side. And that's where reformist projects always end up choosing capitalism. In most cases, that meant their social base was debilitated, and the traditional bourgeois parties were able to push them out, beat them in elections, or some combination. In Maduro's case, through sheer repression and the desire to maintain himself in power of the state and his privileges, like a true Stalinist bureaucracy, it ended up being himself, not in person, the regime that implemented all the same measures that Bolsonaro did in Brazil, that Macri did here, in the sense of reversing one by one all of the gains of the previous period. The last one standing is the one they're getting rid of now, which is the law of hydrocarbons. And that was no longer going to any of the people's needs, because all the oil revenue was being siphoned out to sustain the privileges of the Venezuelan bureaucracy, while people were starving and 8 million of them had to leave the country. That's the reality. There's always a choice. And that's true of Delcy Rodriguez as well. Because let's see, she's chosen she hasn't been defeated. She has chosen to participate in the plunder of her country, to associate with Trump and imperialism against the people of Venezuela. She has chosen that. She could have chosen any number of other things. It's her brother, it's Diosdado Cabello, because there seems to be, for now, a level of unity in the key members of the bureaucracy in going this way. They did not choose to call on anyone to resist. They did not choose to step down and say, I'm not going to do it. Take me like you took Maduro, and take all of us. And then, you know what? You're going to have to come in here and rule this country yourself. And you know what? The people won't take it. and there will be a resistance. No, they chose to facilitate. Because what's the difference between Iraq and here? Iraq, they ended up losing in Iraq. They learned from that. That's why Trump doesn't want to invade and play some Nobel Prize who doesn't control the state. They want things running smoothly. Don't believe the oil people saying, oh, it's uninvestable bullshit. They just want state subsidies to make it more profitable. And another thing is true. In neither case is the key reason to need the oil in Iraq in 2003 or in Venezuela today that the US directly needs that oil. In both cases, it's that they need to control the oil that China needs. The project for a new American century that everyone that entered Bush's cabinet wrote in the 90s, essentially, it's all public. We need to shift to control these areas of the world directly, because if not, China's going to overtake us in 10, 20 years. And that was Iraq. It was all the places where, and they've been going downhill since then. So it's important what Delcy is choosing to do, because this decision is helping US imperialism a lot. It's making a huge difference in favor of US imperialism. It's making it possible for them to profit and control the oil when it could go downhill for them if they try to control it themselves. They are choosing to be participants in the plunder, not resist it, not step aside. They are choosing to be the viceroys that apply the policy of the master. And that cannot be defended. I'll say one thing about the left. It's resurging. It's resurging. All opposition was destroyed by Maduro. Maria Socialista and others have survived. Many of our comrades are exiled, imprisoned. The Communist Party as well, all of us. We are beginning to put something together again. It's bright because when this statement comes out, with these rejecting the US imperialism, rejecting collaboration, calling for resistance, calling for using the oil, we're going to be the only ones doing it, because you know who's not resisting, who's not calling on anyone to resist, who's not going to be saying any of this stuff, is anyone in the Venezuelan government, because the Venezuelan government has passed to the side of imperialism. There will be no declaration calling for resistance and for rejecting US imperialist plunder from there. The only one will come from a resurging anti-capitalist left in Venezuela. About the left, briefly, Trotskyism in Latin America. The one place where comrade who was talking about this, asking about this, is entirely true in those terms, is Bolivia, where Trotskyism as an organization with a clear program had a large organization of tens of thousands and played a leading role, leading hundreds of thousands or millions in a revolution, which was fucked up because of political mistakes. Leave it at that. Everywhere else, it's more relative. In Argentina, the two organizations, the party that was founded that 2 years later split into guerrillists, and what became what is now today the MST, was not huge. The guerrillists that became one of the main guerrillas in the 70s abandoned Trotskyism by the time they had that significance. The best moment, the biggest organized force Trotskyism has had in Argentina was in the 80s after the fall of the dictatorship with the MAS, which, like so much of the revolutionary left in the world, entered crisis and broke apart after the fall of the Berlin Wall and the Soviet Union. And what is left of that is what was rebuilt into what is now the MST. Now, today is not a bad moment for Trotskyism in Argentina. We don't have the 20,000 members the MAS had in the 80s, but between the four parties, we might have 10,000 or a bit more, the four parties of the left front. And the left front has something that the MAS didn't have. The MAS had led many unions, but Peronism was very strong. Peronism led the working class very tightly. Today, the influence of a million votes, of dozens of deputies, of influence in the working class, the broader influence that Trotskyism has in Argentina today, because the rest of the left has for years now been dissolved into the bourgeois Peronist alliances, means that all there is to the left is the Trotskyist left front. And and that's as far as the good things go, because last time I was in one of your meetings, we were talking about this. The huge problem with the left front is that it could be much more, and it's not because of problems we have. I won't get into it, but that's not a bad moment. Peru, similar to the guerrilla, is here. Hugo Blanco was a Trotskyist in the Argentinian party when he went to Peru and became a mass peasant leader, but he did not have a Trotskyist organization. And the mass rebellion he was leading did not have Trotskyist politics beyond what he attempted to do. And by the time he was in prison, released from prison, and became a political congressperson and everything, he was no longer a revolutionary. So Trotskyism in Latin America was never that huge, except in Bolivia in the 50s. And that's it. If I have 3 more minutes, I'll say one more thing.
Sure.
If you guys have 3 more minutes of attention around the general, I think there's a lot we don't know, and that's why I started saying it's good that we all speculate, analyze, discuss, clash, because it's the way we're going to understand what is happening. It's never very clear when bourgeois politics, imperialist politics are shifting, even for them, because it's also an internal political struggle within the ruling class in which way to go. I think the few things that are clear are U.S. imperialism has been in decline for some time. A sector of the bourgeoisie has reached power that is decided that they need to create a huge change in the entire infrastructure that has been in place since World War II to attempt to reverse that. And this year, with Trump more politically secure in power, he is attempting a huge offensive on that front, attempting to create a new world order, which I think we need to analyze a lot more. What do they want it to be? How much do they agree? What are they trying to do? For now, he's generated a huge world disorder, but we need to continue analyzing it. There's one thing that is important about this, I think. The entire infrastructure that was set up in World War II, we can't forget that it had everything to do with the worldwide revolution that shook the world at the end of World War II, and that failed because of Stalinist treason. Because that is what made imperialism become the defenders of democracy in the world. That is why there was a Marshall Plan. That is why Trump is saying, why are we subsidizing you? Yeah, you were subsidizing them because it was all going to go communist. But they don't need that anymore. There isn't the threat of world revolution, and there isn't a Soviet Union to compete with them, to where they are the defenders of democracy versus communist tyranny. They don't need it anymore. But the consequence of that is that if this continues in this direction, they will all have to go in that direction. And pretty soon we'll be back to the days when revolutionary socialists were the only ones that defended human rights like democracy and the rights of people, et cetera, et cetera. And that has a silver lining, I think.
Right. Federico, that was very, very good. Great lead off and summing up, and I think one of the best discussions we've had. And of course, the discussion will continue. Federico, you're welcome anytime to come to our discussions and both to continue this discussion and, of course, the other topics that we'll be discussing.
Yeah, thanks for your time. I take a lot of great ideas from this discussion as well. Thank you, guys.
Oh, thanks very much, Federico. We must stay in close touch, okay? Norma, have you got it's like an announcement? We can't really continue the discussion now.
Yes, very briefly, I want to say that when I said with oil or without oil, of course, that is one resource even not well exploited in Venezuela. But the oil is not. I mean, the main thing is the geopolitical region and what that represents against for the U.S. imperialism against other China, for instance. Not forget that China was very implanted also in Argentina and also Iran through Venezuela. So it's a geopolitical game, a geopolitical situation. And besides that, the resource in each part, I mean, because there are also lithium, there are also new resources you need. So that came, of course, but it's not the main, it's geopolitical and is the division, the distribution of this geopolitical power, which is in game, in particular in South America, and not forget U.S. is within America. And so that is all. Thank you.
We'll be coming back to this topic many times. So I really think we have to close it. We're well over our normal time as well. So if you don't mind, Norm, I'm sorry to shut you down, Anyway, thanks to all the comrades for participating. Next week, we had planned a meeting of our organisation committee. We have some business to discuss. But like last time, one of the comrades who participated was from Minneapolis, and he gave an absolutely gripping account of events there. And we're hoping he will come back again. And the meeting is, I think we need to devote most of our time to an update on the absolutely crucial and stirring events that are taking place in Minneapolis and in the USA as a whole. So we'll see you next week, comrades. Thanks for a very stimulating discussion. Bye bye.